Right. So today we shall start to discuss about the model hierarchy. Right. And as we have discussed earlier, there are different types of model. Okay. Earlier we discussed in terms of the dynamical models, statistical models, all right, laboratory models, etc. Earlier we have talked about that. But all these models can be classified basically into three categories, we can say. Right? One is the simple types of model, other is the intermediate types of model, and third is the complex types of model. Right? This screen visible to you clearly? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So among the simple
Yes,
type
sir.
of models, basically we have three types. One is the single column model, other is the energy balance model, and third is the radiative convective model. Okay, so we shall discuss in detail about each of these models. Then in the intermediate category, we have got the filtered models that I was talking to you yesterday. There's the barotropic model, baroclinic model, a two-layer model or multi-layer models. And in the third category, there is the complex models. We have got the so-called general circulation models, which contains the three-dimensional features of the atmosphere, global atmosphere. It includes all kinds of dynamics and physical processes. So that is the general circulation type of model. And we have also regional climate model, which focuses over a particular region or the earth. Okay, so these basically simple, intermediate, and complex type of models describes almost all aspects of the atmosphere. Today, we shall start with the first one. Okay, and shall discuss about this one, starting with the EBM. Have you studied about the EBM earlier in the first semester or in any other course? Yes or no? Have you studied about the energy balance model earlier?
No,
Yes,
sir.
sir, we briefly read about the definition and that's it.
The definition, etc., but not
Yes,
really in detail.
yes, sir.
Okay, okay. So today we shall slightly discuss about the energy balance model in detail. Okay, and if possible, also cover something about the single column model. Right? What is energy balance model? As the name suggests, it balances the incoming and the outgoing energy over the earth surface. Okay, the incoming energy is basically from the sun, and how that energy gets modulated by the intervening layers of the atmosphere and the earth's surface itself. That is what is described in the energy balance model. Okay, it's a simple model because such kind of models are generally used to understand the basic concepts of the atmospheric physics, you can say. But such kind of models are not used for any prediction purpose. Okay, they are good for the understanding the concepts. Now, an energy balance model does not attempt to resolve the dynamics of the climate system because it's a simple model. that is the large-scale wind and atmospheric circulation systems, ocean currents, convective motions in the atmosphere and ocean, or any number of other basic features of the climate system. When those complex features are not really studied using the EBM or energy balance model, but we just try to understand the basic concept, the conceptual features only. So in the EBM, instead, it simply focuses on the energetics and thermodynamics of the climate system. Okay. Now we shall start, let us say, with the so-called zero-dimensional EBM. Okay, zero-dimensional EBM, energy balance model. The simplest model that can be invoked to explain, for example, the average surface temperature of the Earth. Okay, if you want to just estimate roughly what could be the average temperature of the Earth, then we can do that using such types of simple model, or so-called the zero-dimensional EBM. Okay. Now, in this very simple model, the Earth is treated as a mathematical point in space, in a large, vast universe. The Earth is just treated as a small point, okay, in space. That is to say, there is no explicit accounting for the latitude, longitude, or altitude of the Earth. Just considered as a small point in the space. The entire Earth is considered as a small point in the space. Hence, we refer to such a model as zero dimensional because we don't consider the variations in the horizontal. There is no latitude, there is no longitude, and no altitude. Okay, so this is considered or called as a zero-dimensional model or zero-dimensional energy balance model. Okay, in the EBM, we solve only for the balance between incoming and outgoing zero-dimensionalizing sources of energy and radiation at the surface. Okay, this is what we do. We just try to balance between incoming and outgoing radiation energy. We then build up a little bit more complexity, taking into account the effect of the Earth's atmosphere. Okay. In particular, the impact of the atmospheric greenhouse effect through use of the so-called gray body variant of the EBM. Right? You have heard about the black body, right? Earlier in the atmospheric physics, you have learned about the black body radiation, right? Similarly, there is a gray body also. Black body is like an idealized body. Gray body is like slightly realistic. So, by considering the Earth as a gray body, we try to introduce slightly the impact of the atmospheric greenhouse gases. Okay, so that we can estimate the Earth's temperature slightly more realistically. Okay, so that's what we do to add a simple, little bit simple complexity, okay, in the model. Now the zero-dimensional or zero-D EBM simply models the balance between incoming and outgoing radiation at the Earth surface that we have already said. This balance is in reality quite complicated, and we have to make a number of simplifying assumptions if we are to obtain a simple conceptual model that encapsulates the key features, okay, of the atmosphere. Because we know that in reality there is a variation of the latitude, there is a variation of the longitude, there is a variation of the altitude also, okay. But we try to simplify it by considering Earth as the simplest point in the space for conceptual point of view. So we will assume that the amount of short wave radiation absorbed by the Earth is simply 1 minus alpha times S by 4. Okay, because if the let me start the drawing board. Suppose if you have the Earth here like this, okay, and this is, let's say, Sun. Okay, the sun's radiation is reaching the Earth surface. Okay, so what is the amount of radiation, the incoming energy at the Earth surface? Okay, that we can estimate by simple radiation laws. Right? We can estimate by simple radiation laws, and that is 1 minus alpha times S by 4. 1 minus alpha times S by 4. Okay, this is 1 minus alpha times S divided by 4. Okay, where S is the solar constant. Okay, S is the solar constant. Okay, and which is roughly about 1370 watts per meter square. Okay, but potentially it is variable over time. It's not fixed all the time, but it can vary with time, that is according to the season, okay, or time of the day, the amount of the solar constant at the top of the atmosphere, right? And in this expression, alpha is the average reflectivity of Earth's surface looking down from space. That is the planetary albedo, right? Alpha is the basically planetary albedo, which represents the energy reflected from the Earth's surface. Okay, accounting for reflection by clouds and the atmosphere, as well as reflective surface of Earth, including ice. Okay, and its value is approximately or roughly 0.32. But again, it also can vary somewhat with time. Okay, the albedo, the average albedo of the Earth generally is about 0.32, but can vary with time because it depends upon the ice and other uh, characteristics of the Earth surface, like vegetation, okay, distribution of the vegetation, forest, water bodies, etc., etc., right? The types of the land, soil, whether it is a sandy land or it's a clay land, like that. Okay. So we will assume that the outgoing long wave radiation, okay, denoted by OLR, is given simply by treating the Earth as a black body initially. Later on, we shall see that. Now, if we do that, then the estimated temperature of the Earth is not so realistic. But initially, to make it simple, we'll consider Earth as a black body. And as you know, this is a body that absorbs all radiation incident upon it, like the black body. Okay. So, according to the Stephen Boltzmann's law for black body radiation, which is for an object that emits radiation in proportion to the fourth power of its temperature. That is the Stephen Boltzmann's law, right? The radiation emitted by a surface is proportional to the fourth power of the temperature that you already studied in atmospheric physics. That the flux of heat from the surface is given by FBB is equal to epsilon times sigma times Ts to the power 4. Okay, that is the radiation emitted by the black body. Okay, radiation emitted by the black body. So in the last equation, sigma is known as the Stephen Boltzmann's constant. Okay, and has a value 5.67 times to the power minus 8 watts per meter square per Kelvin to the power 4. Okay, that is sigma, and epsilon is the emissivity of the object, which is dimensionless, and it is a measure of the how good a black body object is over the range of wavelengths in which it is emitting the radiation. That is the emissivity, and Ts is the surface temperature. Okay, so in this equation, this is the Stephen's Boltzmann's constant, this is the surface temperature, and this is the emissivity. So the net amount of radiation emitted by a surface of the earth is, by any surface, now can be approximated or can be given by this formula for the black body. Okay. Now for the relatively cold earth, the radiation is simply emitted in the infrared regime of the electromagnetic spectrum. Okay. Earth is relatively cold compared to the sun, and the emissivity is very close to 1. Okay. So we will approximate the surface temperature of the earth indicated by Ts as representing the average skin temperature of the earth covered with 70% of the ocean. Okay. Furthermore, we will treat the ocean as a mixed layer of average 70-meter depth, and this ignores the impacts of heat exchange with the deep ocean, but is not a bad first approximation, right? So we are trying to simplify. Okay, first of all, we consider Earth to be just a small point in the space without any variation of the latitude, longitude, and altitude, the so-called zero-dimensional EBM. And even on that, we're just considering the Earth to be covered with 70% ocean, which has a depth, an average depth of about 70 meters. Okay, so that it will ignore the impacts of heat exchange with the deep ocean. Okay, this is what we try to assume for simplification. Now we can then approximate the thermodynamic effect of the mixed layer of the ocean in terms of the effective heat capacity of the Earth. That is the sum of land and ocean. That consists of land and ocean. Okay, and we can write the heat capacity, the effective heat capacity, as given by C is equal to 2.08 times to the power 8 joules per Kelvin per square meter. The effective heat capacity of the Earth can be approximately given by this value. If we assume the Earth is covered by 70% of the ocean and its average depth is about 70 meters. Okay, mixed layer depth. So we can write the flux delta F of radiation, okay, is equal to C times dTs by dt, where Ts is the surface temperature and dTs by dt is the rate of change of surface temperature. C is the effective heat capacity of the Earth, and this is the flux, net flux. So the condition of energy balance can then be described in terms of the thermodynamics, which states that any change in the internal energy per unit area per unit time must balance the rate of net heating. Okay, in this simplified form. All right. So which is the difference between the incoming short wave and outgoing long wave radiation? Okay. So mathematically, that gives C times dTs by dt is equal to 1 minus alpha times S divided by 4 minus epsilon times sigma times Ts to the power 4. Okay, this is trying to estimate the Earth's temperature by this way. Okay, the rate of change of Earth's temperature dTs by dt is equal to 1 minus alpha times S divided by 4, which is the net incoming solar radiation, and this is the value emitted by the Earth's surface. Okay, so this is basically a budget equation: incoming minus outgoing. This is the incoming energy from the sun on to the Earth, and this is the outgoing after whatever emission emitted by the Earth's surface. So that is what will determine the change in the Earth's temperature dTs by dt. Okay, let's say this is equation number 2. Let's suppose that the incoming radiation, the first term on the right hand side, this one, okay, is larger than the outgoing long wave radiation, that is the second term. If this term is larger than this term, then what will happen? And you can easily understand that the Earth's temperature will then keep on increasing, right? And the entire right hand side would become positive. If this incoming is larger than this outgoing, that means the right hand side will become positive. And which means that the left hand side, the rate of change of temperature of the Earth over time will be positive. That means Earth will keep warming, continuously warm with time. Okay. In other words, Ts must be increasing. The surface temperature of the Earth must be increasing. And this in turn means that the outgoing radiation must increase. I mean, if it has to balance, if the Earth surface temperature of the Earth, the average surface temperature of the Earth has to remain, say, constant, then these two terms must balance, right? As you can easily understand, right? If it doesn't balance, then either the temperature of the Earth will continuously increase or continuously decrease, right? If the incoming is larger than the outgoing, the Earth's temperature will continuously increase, or if the outgoing is larger than the incoming, then the Earth's temperature will continuously decrease. So, in order that the Earth's temperature remains fixed in an average, the two terms must balance on the right hand side. Okay, and at this point, there is no longer any change of the Ts with time. That is, we achieve an equilibrium. That means when there is a balance, when there is a balance between the incoming and the outgoing energy, right, then the Earth's temperature will remain constant with time. Okay, and we say that it is in a equilibrium state. It has reached the equilibrium state. Okay, so in equilibrium state, the time derivative term is zero by definition. When the two terms balance, that means C dTs by dt is zero, right? And we thus must have equality between the outgoing and incoming radiation. That is between the two terms on the right hand side of the equation, the last equation. And this is a purely algebraic expression, okay, given by this. So because this term is zero, so we can simply write that epsilon times C, sigma times Ts to the power 4 is equal to 1 minus alpha times S divided by 4. Simple algebraic equation. And then from this equation, we can easily estimate the average temperature of the Earth's surface, Ts, right? Let's see, this is equation number 3. So the factor 1 by 4, the last expression, comes from the fact, you see the figure below, okay, in this figure, that the Earth is emitting radiation over the entirety of its surface area, which is pi r square, where r is the radius of the Earth, but at any given time only receiving incoming solar radiation over its cross-sectional area pi r square. Okay. So in this diagram, we have shown this is the Earth surface having a temperature Ts. Okay, and this is the solar radiation flux. Okay, solar radiation flux. So the amount of flux energy received by the Earth's surface is given by pi r square times s. Okay, where r is the radius of the Earth, s is the solar constant, and similarly, the emitted infrared radiation from the Earth's surface is given by 4 pi r square times sigma Ts to the power 4. Now this factor 4 is because Earth is emitting in all directions, right? Earth is emitting in all directions. But this factor 4 is not here because Earth is not receiving solar radiation at all time from all directions, right? So only a small cross section of the area of the Earth is receiving the energy at a given time, right? But it is emitting from all sides at all the time. So, as you know, the reflected solar energy basically is pi r square s times alpha. This is the reflected solar energy. Okay, pi r square s times alpha. So it turns out that since the Earth's surface temperature varies over a relatively small range, less than 30 degree Kelvin. I mean, if you just see on the average, the change in temperature from say equator to pole on average, in such a idealistic situation, varies less than 30 degree Kelvin about its mean long-term temperature in the range of say 0 degree or 273 degree Kelvin. Okay, the long-term mean when there is no radiation, the long-term mean is about say 0 degree centigrade or 273 degree Kelvin. So from the long-term mean, the temperature varies only by about 30 degree Kelvin. That is, it varies only by at most 10% or so. It is valid to approximate the fourth degree term in the last equation by a linear relationship. Okay, that is, this emitted radiation epsilon times sigma times Ts to the power 4 is equal to A plus B times Ts. Okay, we're just trying to approximate this by a linear relation. Okay, let's see, this is equation number 4, where A and B are the constants, and if we try to estimate the values of A and B, they come to be about 315 watts per meter square and 4.6 watts per meter square per Kelvin for the B. These are the approximate values of the A and B. Okay. So if we substitute the approximate values of the A and B, then we can easily calculate the temperature of the surface from here, because we know what is sigma, we know what is epsilon. Such an approximation is often used in atmospheric science and other areas of physics when appropriate, and is called the linearization. Okay, we just try to approximate the energy balance, and this is called the linearization. Using this approximation, we can readily solve this equation for Ts. Okay, as Ts is equal to S times 1 minus alpha divided by 4 times A divided by B. Okay, where this term has come from the previous equation. Okay, so if we substitute in this equation the approximate values of A and B, then we can compute the Earth's temperature by assuming or by considering the Earth as a black body. Okay, and you might find rather disappointing that if we try to estimate the Earth's temperature by this way, after all these kind of uh, calculations and manipulations, the temperature of the Earth calculated in this way is way off from the reality. Okay, is far away from the reality, and we will find that in this way, if we substitute S to be 1370 watts per meter square, the albedo to be 0.32, then from that last equation that you saw, you will get the surface temperature of the Earth to be about 255 degree Kelvin. Right? That is about approximately how much degree? How much below the zero? Approximately minus 18 degrees centigrade. Right? Suppose if the Earth's temperature, average temperature of the Earth was minus 18 degrees centigrade always, then do you think that we could have survived? Obviously, no. And we know that,
No, sir.
yeah. So we know that the average approximate temperature of the Earth is about 288 degree Kelvin. That is about 15 degrees centigrade. That's why the life on the Earth is sustaining, right? So what went wrong? Because we have tried to estimate this temperature of the Earth's surface based upon our knowledge of the physics, right? The balance between the incoming and outgoing radiation. We try to consider whatever is incoming radiation from the sun and whatever is the outgoing based upon the radiation law. Okay, considering the Earth to be black body. And if we do that, then we found that the estimated temperature of the Earth would be about 255 degree Kelvin, which is way off from the reality. Okay, and the reality is about 288 degree Kelvin. So somewhere something is missing, right? Which we have not considered, right? Physically in our calculation, right? So what is that which is missing? Something is missing, right? Because certainly Earth's temperature is not 255 degree Kelvin, that all of us know, right?
So the greenhouse effect.
Exactly, yeah. It is the greenhouse effect which is missing, which we have not considered so far, right? And the greenhouse effect, as you already know, does not allow all the radiation to escape to the space because there are greenhouse gases covering the Earth's surface and they protect the Earth's temperature, okay, from decreasing indefinitely, right? So our model gave a result that was hoping 23 degrees centigrade, roughly 60 degree Fahrenheit, too cold, okay, by the idealized computation. So think about it, as you already know that what we forgot, and that is the greenhouse effect. We have forgotten or we have not considered the greenhouse effect so far. If we consider the greenhouse effect, okay, then we can see that the temperature of the Earth would be approximately 288 degree Kelvin. Okay, so that is the topic of the next category of model, that is the radiative convective model. Okay, we shall discuss now slightly more in detail about that model later on in this class. Okay, when we talk about the radiative convective model, that is slightly more physical than compared to what we have discussed so far in the energy balance model, EBM. And in the radiative convective models, we considered the effects of different types of greenhouse gases and then get the temperature of the earth more realistic. Okay. So after the EBM, the next category of the model is so-called single column model. Okay. Single column model. What is single column model? We can continue, right? It's already 12:30, but you're free, isn't it? You don't have class right now, all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Or do you want
Yes.
to break for 5 minutes, or we can continue? This is a new topic, single column model. Do you think that we take a break of 5 minutes and then start again, or we continue? What is your response? People are silent. I see only 3 plus 2. Only 5 students are here.
Sir, it's okay if you continue.
It is okay. We can continue, right? Okay,
Yes,
great.
sir.
Yeah,
Yes.
very good. So I don't know what happened. Only 5 students. Whatever. Anyway. So single column models. Okay. Now, as the name implies, in the single column model, we consider a single column of the atmosphere. Okay. Let's say this is the Earth's surface. This is the Earth. Okay. And as you know, when we are solving the dynamical equations numerically, then we divide the entire Earth surface in different grid boxes. Okay, grid boxes like illustrated in this figure. Okay, so let's say this is the projection of a part of the Earth's surface. Okay, small part of the Earth's surface is projected here like this, and then each grid box of this surface is representing one column of the atmosphere. This is the one column of the atmosphere. Okay, that's why the name comes single column model, because it is a single column of the model. Now, within this single column of the atmosphere, we consider whatever physical processes are possible. For example, in this diagram, we illustrate that. Now, in this single column of the atmosphere, we have all sorts of things, like we have got buildings, we have got meteorological towers, okay, we have got let's say other instrumentations, flux radiometers, okay, we have got cloud radars. We have different instrumentations which are there at the Earth surface, and many other instruments like LiDAR and so on. Okay, so we have all these instrumentations at the surface which we can use to measure the different properties in this single column of the atmosphere. Okay. So by using such kind of models, we try to again simplify the atmosphere for understanding purpose. Okay, understanding the physical processes. Within this single column, we try to consider all possible physical processes, like we have got the clouds also in the single column of the atmosphere. Okay, we have got the incoming radiation, we have got the outgoing radiation from the surf, we have got the aerosols also in the single column. Okay, and at the surface again we have got vegetations, okay, water body, etc. Okay, and everything that we have got in the full-fledged three-dimensional atmosphere, we try to consider all the physics also in the single column. So in other words, we try to use this model, SCM, single column model, to test the physics when we try to develop a new physical process or try to develop a new physical parameterization scheme, then whether that scheme is really working well or not, we try to test by using the single column model, because a single column model is a simplified model, right? And it does not contain all the remaining complexities which are there in the three-dimensional model of the atmosphere. Okay. So a single column model is essentially a single grid column of a global model considered in isolation from the rest of the model. Okay. Observational data at the surface, for example, here all these are observational instrumentations. So observational data is used to specify what is going on in the neighboring columns. Okay. This allows the model to run much faster and cheaper than the full global model and allows researchers to focus on particular variables and equations within the model code. Okay. Because if we try to solve the equations, the full-fledged three-dimensional equations over the entire globe, one thing is that it takes a lot of computational time. Okay, you need to have a lot of computing power to solve the full-fledged three-dimensional global atmospheric model. And so, if you are trying to just test one physics that you might have developed yourself, then it will take a lot of time to test that. Secondly, if you are trying to test just one physics, its result might get contaminated or diluted because of the errors in other physical processes, right? Because we know that the knowledge of the Earth's atmosphere is still not perfect, right? There is always a lacuna in our understanding of the physical processes of the atmosphere, right? So if you are trying to test one physics, then the errors in the other physical processes might contaminate the results of your physics which you are trying to test. And therefore, in a single column model, what we do is we keep or specify the impact of all other physical processes as constant and just vary the one which we are trying to test. For example, we are trying to develop a new scheme for parameterization of clouds, for example, in a single column model of the atmosphere. We are trying to test a new parameterization scheme of clouds or convection or whatever. Then what we do is we try to specify or prescribe the fluxage of the energy from all other physical processes to be constant and then vary the one which we are trying to develop and test. Okay, that's what we do. That is the philosophy of the single column model. Okay. Also, when we have just one column of the model atmosphere, then we have got a difficulty that this column, of course, is single column, but in reality, the features from the neighboring grid points or neighboring columns of the atmosphere can influence these this single column, because of the advective processes. In other words, the heat and moisture can be advected from outside this column into this column from all sides, from left side as well as from the right side. The fluxes of the heat and moisture can get advected into this column which we are trying to consider for testing the physical process, right? In reality, that's what will happen. So, in that case, somehow we have to also estimate the impact of the advective processes, okay, which bring in the influence of the processes from outside this grid column into this grid column. Okay. So therefore, what it means is that in a single column model of the atmosphere, we try to prescribe the vertical fluxes of heat and moisture because of the advective processes from the neighboring grid point. And we also try to specify the fluxes due to other physical parameterizations like radiative fluxes. For example, if we are trying to test, for example, a cloud physics, okay, a cloud microphysics scheme in a single column model, then we will have all the equations for the cloud microphysics, all the species of the hydrometeors, whether it is a liquid water, ice, snow, gravel, hail, etc., etc. We will have all complex equations for all those things. But for other physical processes like radiation or convection or the PBL, that is a planetary boundary layer, the surface fluxes, the land surface processes, etc., etc. So the impact of all other physical processes, we try to prescribe in this single column of the atmosphere and vary only the one in which we are interested in. That is, for example, let's say cloud microphysics. Or if we are trying to test the convection, then we prescribe the impact of cloud microphysics and vary the convection, and so on. So in this way, if our new scheme that we have developed has some kind of a weakness, then we can isolate that weakness of the new scheme. Otherwise, if we allow them to operate together along with all the physical processes, and that's what we do in the three-dimensional GCM, then we don't know that whether the new scheme that we are testing is giving erroneous result because of its own lack of the understanding, or it is giving error because of the other physical processes, right? So this is the advantage of single column model. Are you able to understand what I'm trying to explain? Yes or no?
Sir, actually, I didn't get you.
You didn't get me. Okay. What I'm trying to say again is that, well, let me now use the help of a drawing board. Okay. Now let's say this is your Earth surface. Okay. And on your Earth surface, you have got, say, so many grid points. When we are trying to model the Earth surface, you've got so many grid points. Okay. Now you have got many physical processes in the atmosphere that we already know, isn't it? For example, one is the radiation, right? Other is the, say, convection. Okay. Third is the cloud, microphysics. Okay. Say fourth is the PBL, planetary boundary layer. Okay. Fifth is the land surface processes, and so on. All these are major physical processes that are there in the atmospheric model. Okay. Now suppose if you think that some of the physical processes, say like cloud microphysics or convection, is not accurate. I mean, in your opinion, let us say, in your opinion, one of the physical processes that is included in the model, mathematical model, is not accurate, if you think, suppose, and you want to develop your own scheme, okay, you want to develop your own scheme of, let us say, cloud microphysics. Develop your own scheme. Although many schemes have been proposed by many authors, researchers, scientists for all these physical processes that you may be knowing, right? But if still you think that no, this cloud microphysics is not properly included or represented in the model of the atmosphere, so you want to develop your own scheme. Okay. Now, if you want to develop your own scheme, you'd like to test it, right? Whether your scheme is doing good, doing better than the existing scheme or not, isn't it? You have to test it, demonstrate it, prove it that your new scheme that you have proposed or developed is better than the existing schemes. So, how will you test it? How will you test your own scheme? So, you will test that scheme by actually considering one column of the atmosphere. Okay. Let's say this is one single column, the atmosphere. Okay, so this is just a single column over this grid box. Over this grid box, this is a single column of the atmosphere. Okay. Now, in this single column of the atmosphere, you are trying to test your new scheme. Okay. But when you are trying to test your new scheme, then you must keep these other schemes fixed in the single column. Otherwise, if it is not fixed, then what will happen is that the imperfections of these schemes would contaminate your result of your new scheme, the result of your new scheme, right? So you try to keep them fixed and prescribe their values through some means. Okay. You also try to prescribe the advective fluxage. For example, let's say this is the advective fluxage from outside this grid column. Okay, from the neighboring grid points, the things will be advected. Okay, so this also you try to prescribe at all the levels in the vertical, so that your atmospheric column is isolated from rest of the modular grid boxes. And in this isolated column, the only thing that is varying is your own scheme that you have tried to develop and trying to test, right? And in that case, we try to test it so-called semi-prognostically. Prognostically. Let me say, it is not fully prognostic. This is semi-prognostic in the sense that you try to collect the observations. Normally, last time we were talking about the field experiments like MONEX, etc. We talked last time. Do you remember? We talked about the MONEX field experiments. MONEX.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. We also tried to talk about the GATE, right? Field experiment. So from these field experiments, for example, we tried to collect intensive observations over a small part of the region. For example, over this region, we tried to collect intensive observations using different instrumentations, maybe aircraft, maybe ship, maybe atmospheric tower, okay, maybe flux radiometers and so on. So you've got special observations collected in this part of the Earth's surface, okay, over a time period, let us say for 1 week, or maybe even for longer than 1 week, let us say, no, or 2 weeks, or 1 month, or 1 month, let us say. You try to collect spatial observation more frequently, for example, every 3 hourly or every 1 hourly, okay, observation, because you are in a testing mode. You're doing a field experiment to test your new physical processes scheme, new scheme to parameterize the physical process, right? So we have got a time series. If you have a time series of observations, okay, this is, let's say, x-axis your time, like day 1, d1, d2, d2, okay, we move this somewhere there, okay, so this is d2 and so on, time, okay. So you can have more frequent observations, either 3 hourly or 1 hourly, in this grid box, okay. And then starting with the initial time, you run your SCM, single column model, you run your SCM or integrate your SCM from this time step to the next time step, okay. Now at this time step, again you have got the observed value. At this time step, you have got the, because you have got the observed values at all time steps. At all these time steps, you have got the observed values from the field experiments like Monex or GATE. Okay, you got the observed values. So you have developed a new model or new scheme of the physical process, and you're testing or running it from this time step to this time step. Okay. Now at every time step you have got the observation. So once you integrate your model from here to there, from your model you will get the new values of the fluxes or new values of the variables. It can be temperature, it can be a specific humidity, it can be rainfall also if it is a cloud microphysics scheme or convection parameterization scheme, etc. Anything. So the new values of now variables like rain, okay, the temperature T or the RH, relative humidity, etc. Everything you obtain from your new scheme, which you have developed, your own scheme, okay. And this, at this time, you also have the observed values of these parameters, rain, temperature, and RH. So you compare with this observation the values which you have predicted or obtained from your new scheme, okay. And you can know that what is the difference between your new scheme's prediction and the available observation, right? And after that, again, you integrate your model or new scheme from this time step to this time step, another time step. Again, at this time step, you've got observation, further you compare, and so on. You march ahead for all time steps, either for the whole week or for the whole month that you have got the observations from such field experiments. So this is called the semi-prognostic test. Semi-prognostic test. Okay. You're not integrating your model continuously from here to there to there to there to all time step, but you are stopping at every time step. You came from here to there, and then at this point again you have got observations. So fit in your observation in the model. Again, march forward, integrate the model to the next time step. Again, compare your prediction with the observation at this time step, and using the observation from this time step, you further integrate to the next time steps, and so on. So you're marching forward in time semi-prognostically, not fully prognostically. In a fully prognostic test, what you do is, rather than using observations at each of these time steps, you will continuously integrate your model from this time till the end of the time. Okay. So are you able to understand now, Sri Lakshmi? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
better
sir.
than before, right?
Yes.
Maybe better than before. So this is what is the semi-prognostic test. And you know the difference now between a semi-prognostic test or a fully prognostic test. Now, sometimes you can get questions in your exam. What is the difference between semi-prognostic and fully prognostic test? Okay, or what is the difference between a single column model SCM and the EBM energy balance model? As you remember, today we discussed that in a energy balance model, we just consider the entire Earth to be just one single point in space, and just try to estimate the Earth's temperature using a simple balance between incoming and outgoing radiation energy. In the single column model, we try to go a little bit more in complexity and try to introduce the fluxage of heat, moisture from the advection from the neighboring grid points, okay, and try to test any new scheme that we have developed for the physical process, okay. So that is the SCM, okay. So single column model, now you have got a fairly good concept about that, is or can be considered to be a grid column of a climate model, again considered in isolation from the rest of the model, okay. As in the semi-prognostic test, now you know what is semi-prognostic test. Observations are used to specify what is going on in the neighboring columns, and observations may or may not also be used to specify tendencies due to some parameterized processes other than those being tested. I have already explained to you that except for the scheme that you are trying to test, your own scheme that you might have developed, you're trying to test rest of the other schemes, we keep them fixed, or we just prescribe the tendencies due to the other parameterized physical processes, okay. The key difference between the single column modeling and the semi-prognostic test is that in a single column model, the results obtained for one observation time are used to predict new values of the prognostic variables, which are then provided as an input for the next observation time. As I have tried to explain you now in the blackboard, that for each time step, we try to integrate the model time step by time step, and for each time step, we have got the observations. So we prescribe the new observations and go on to the next time step. Okay, this is what we do. So one observation time are used to predict the new values of the prognostic variables, which are then provided as input for the next observation time. Okay. And so our equations are simplified in a single column model. And we can write our governing equation in a very simple way in a single column model. Okay. And we can write that the governing equations in a very simple form as shown here. Okay, in a very simple form, we can show del x by del t, where x can be any variable. Del x by del t is equal to dls of that x resolved part, and this is the parameterized part, plus fss plus si. Okay, where this term indicates the resolved part, and this is the parameterized part. Do you understand the difference between the resolved part and the parameterized part? Yes or no? How many of you are there? I see about 6 are there. Okay, 6 are there. So, do you understand the difference between the resolved part and the parameterized part? I think sometime back in one of the classes, we have tried to explain that we can resolve a physical process appropriately only when the scale of that process is compatible to the scale of the model. Okay. For example, we are trying to resolve cloud in a model, then the resolution of the model must be compatible to the scale of the cloud. Otherwise, you cannot resolve it properly. Say, for example, the scale of the cloud is about 10 kilometer, a single cloud, and the grid box resolution of the model is 100 kilometer. Then in a 100-kilometer grid box, obviously you cannot resolve a single cloud. So in that case, we have to take into account the effects of the single cloud through parameterized, we call parameterized. Okay. So in the governing equations of the single column model, we have got the resolved part and we have got the parameterized part. Resolved parts are those processes which are compatible in scale to the scale of the model. For example, the numerics part of the model, dynamics part of the model. They are not parameterized. Okay. Whereas the physics is sometimes parameterized if your model resolution is coarse. Okay. Also, you know that in an atmospheric model, the horizontal scale is often much larger than the vertical scale. The horizontal scale of the model is much greater than the vertical scale. Sometimes you can place your top of the atmosphere, say at 10 kilometer or 20 kilometer or even 50 kilometer, right? When you are having a numerical model, you always have to define where the top of your model, right? And it is in your hand where do you want to place the top of the model. You can place it at 10 kilometers above the ground, or 20 kilometers above the ground, or 50 kilometers above the ground. Okay. Suppose you have placed the top of the model at 10 kilometers above the ground. But generally, I mean, earlier in old days, of course, when the computers were not powerful, then the grid resolutions used to be about 100 kilometers or even more than that. So this 100 kilometer is the horizontal scale of the model, which is much greater than the vertical depth, which you have considered to be just 10 kilometers. Okay. And then you've got the numerics also in your model, which is frequently separated to horizontal and vertical parts. Okay. In a three-dimensional model, you have got the numerics, the numerical methods through which you try to solve the equations. Okay. The differentiations, the integrations, etc. And then you've got the physics, which, I mean, the horizontal component of which are usually neglected or treated like independent columns. Okay. So there are all simplifications because each column is not independent in reality. each column has to interact with its neighboring column. In reality, that's what happens. But for the sake of testing purpose or understanding our knowledge of the physics, conceptual knowledge, we try to isolate them, treat them as independent column. Okay. So the testing approaches are like the atmospheric model is a complex non-linear environment, and you've got two-way interaction between the numerical methods, the large-scale processes, the diabatic processes. You've got the two-way interaction between all these processes, the large-scale processes, the diabatic processes, and the numerical methods. So it is difficult to evaluate the impact of a single process of the interest I was trying to explain you earlier, because there is a complex interaction in reality. And so if there is an error in in one process, it will dilute the result of the process that you have developed yourself and trying to test it. So there is a need to define alternative approaches to give more straightforward response, like we call it academic simulations. Academic simulations, that means it is idealized simulations, not a realistic but idealized simulation, or just for academic purpose, academic understanding. Okay, and you've got the LAM, so-called the limited area model, the 2D simulations, the two-dimensional simulations. Sometimes we try to simplify the Earth's atmosphere in a two-dimensional way. So 2D simulations or single column model, single 1D 1D simulation. Single column model is basically a 1D simulation, one-dimensional simulation. So this type of model are ideal for testing environments and offer faster response compared to the full environment, because in full placed model, first of all, it takes a lot of computing time. You may have to wait for several hours to get your results, or sometimes even for days also. But if it is single column model, is simplified model, and you quickly get your result. Of course, single column models are fine to test the physics initially in an isolated way, but eventually it has to be tested along with the full-fledged model. That is later on. Once you are sure that the scheme that you have developed is correct, then you have to again test in the three-dimensional model of the atmosphere. Then only it is a real test. Okay, so the test is in two steps, or I should say three steps. One is the single column semi-prognostic, second is the single column fully prognostic, and third is the full-fledged three-dimensional model in which you try to plug in your new scheme that you have developed and test your new scheme, whether your new scheme is performing better or not. Okay, that's the way. So the single column model is basically a simplistic approach in which small scale processes are fully determined by inter-process balance and large scale forcing. That is, numerics are prescribed, okay, and we evaluate the physical processes. All right. So we can write the equations in this form. The SCM equation, that is the equations of the single column model in this form. For any parameters, say let's say C, you can write del C by del T equal to dC plus PC minus C naught divided by tau. Okay. So one part is the resolved part, other part is the unresolved physical process. This is, let us say, this is dynamics D, this is the physics P. Okay, plus the values because of the subgrid scale processes. Subgrid scale means the physical processes which occur at a much smaller scale than compared to your grid scale of the model, that is the subgrid scale. Okay, so you have got the equation or prognostic equation for the single column model in this form, equal to the changes because of the dynamics, changes because of the physics, and changes because of the subgrid scale processes whose time scale is, let's say, tau. Okay, so DC Here is the large scale dynamical tendencies. PC is the tendency because of physics, and C minus C naught divided by tau is the relaxation term. Relaxation term. Just to kind of tune your result. Now, evolution of the DC and C naught are actually prescribed. Like I said that we try to prescribe the fluxes of the advective processes, fluxes and the radiative fluxes if you are testing any scheme other than the radiation. Okay. So obviously single column models have both advantages and disadvantages. Okay, pros and cons. Okay. What are the pros? The advantages. Number one, it is stable. Stability is fully imposed by large-scale forcing. Okay, it is easier to study physical processes, interaction between different physical processes. It allows to study subset of processes or single processes only. It allows to compare processes regardless of the numerics. Makes it easier to compare different physics packages. Okay, computationally cheap also because it's just one column of the atmosphere. So it's computationally very cheap. You can get a result very faster rather than waiting for hours and hours and sometimes also for days and days to get the results from the computer. And there is a substantial reduction of the problem size. Full data access is no longer an issue. Unlike in the full-fledged three-dimensional model, you have to have a full data sets for the entire Earth surface or for the entire region, even the regional model. In this case, it is enough to have the data over a single box. For example, if you have conducted some special field experiments like GATE or MONEX or whatever. Okay, so these are the pros, the advantages of the single column model. Okay, and what are the cons? The disadvantages. The disadvantages are the SCM balance can easily drift away from reality, and that's what happens if you are trying to integrate it for a longer time. For a small time, fine. Maybe for a few days, 2-3 days, or for 1 week is okay. But if you try to integrate it semi-prognostically or fully prognostically for a longer time, then the balance can be disturbed, will drift away from the reality. Okay, because there is something missing. Okay, the large-scale feedback, small scale to large scale feedback. Okay, feedback from the small scale processes to the large scale processes often leads to biased results. So your model becomes biased. Also, the results are very much related to the quality of and setting of the large scale forcing. Okay, so it depends upon how accurate is your prescribed forcings. Accordingly, your results are dependent. Okay. The third disadvantage is that it doesn't represent the direct three-dimensional effect of some parameterizations like convection, flow interaction with orography, etc., etc. Okay, so this is third disadvantage, that it does not include the three-dimensional effect of some of the parameterized processes. Okay, and therefore we try to use slightly more realistic model, and that is called the radiative convective model. This is yet another model. Okay, radiative convective model. We talked about the EBM, we talked about the SCM, and now this is another model, radiative convective model, which is slightly more realistic. It tries to incorporate slightly more realistic features of the atmosphere, as we just mentioned earlier, like greenhouse gases, etc. Right? So how many of you are present? I'm not sure. We got 6 students. Good, at least 6 are serious. So are you tired? Shall we continue the RCM, or you want it to be discussed in the next class? Tell me, whatever you want.
Next class.
Next class. Yeah, I understand. almost 2 hours, or at least 1.5 hours we have talked. So when you want the next class? Today itself or tomorrow? Tomorrow is Sunday. You want to have a class tomorrow on Sunday?
No, sir. Today, sir, if possible, can you take it today?
Yeah, I can take it today, no problem. What about others?
Sir, don't know.
Others also should react. Varsa, Alvin, Deepak, Anjali, Krishna.
Sir, I think it would be better if it is today. Actually, tomorrow it will be tough.
Tomorrow will be tough. So you want to take rest on Sunday or do many other things on Sunday, right? So
Yes, sir. Today will be fine.
Yes, sir, you can take this one.
okay, so I think I see the majority want it today. Good. Anjali, is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Today it's better.
So what time today? Today, are you free at what time? 3:30 to 4:30? Or you have a class of the madam's class? JP, I see in the timetable. Is he going to take class at 3:30 to 4:30 today?
Yes, sir. Ma'am is going to take class.
3:30. So that means you are free at 2:30 to 3:30? Are you
Yes,
free?
sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So in that
Yes,
case,
sir.
let's take a break.
Yes, sir.
2:30 means just after 1 hour. It's already almost 1:15, more than 1:15. So after about 1 hour, right? At 2:30, we'll again meet. Okay.
Okay, sir.
And
Okay, sir.
yeah, and today I shall complete the simple part. That is, we are talking about the hierarchy of the models. We talked about the simple models, which are like EBM, SCM, and the remaining is RCM. So we shall finish that today. Okay, and also I think after today, the other part of the syllabus like filtered models, etc., will be taught by another teacher, as I told you earlier. Okay, so in that sense, our today's class at 2:30 probably will be the last class from my side. Okay, that will be the last class from my side. Because after this, another teacher will take over. Is that clear to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so
Yes, sir.
fine. So we'll meet at 2:30. Okay.
Sure, sir.
Okay, good.
Yes, sir.
Good. I'm going to stop recording. Stop recording.